Even after their divorce, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson maintained a public front, sharing a home at Royal Lodge, raising their daughters, and appearing side by side at royal events. But the image of a happy divorced couple was a fragile one, propped up by decades of shared secrets and mutual survival. Behind closed doors, tension lingered, rooted in unresolved betrayals and reputational scars. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Their proximity wasn't about romance or reconciliation. It was about convenience, protection, and shielding one another from a world that had turned hostile. When the palace finally stripped Andrew of privileges and forced him out, that fragile illusion finally collapsed. This isn't a tale of enduring affection. It's the slow-motion crash of a relationship shaped by entitlement, avoidance, and mutual compromise. From Andrew's alleged misconduct inside Buckingham Palace to Fergie's scandalous affairs, the cracks were always visible to those willing to look. Their continued closeness masked deeper dysfunction that the public never fully understood. Now, as the consequences catch up to them, their story stands as one of the clearest examples of how power, left unchecked, doesn't just destroy reputations. It corrodes every relationship built on it. It was supposed to be one of the more stable royal marriages of the modern era. A vibrant young duchess, a naval officer prince, a public eager for a fresh royal love story. But what Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew delivered instead was an ongoing saga of infidelity, scandal, blurred lines, and behavior so brazen it shook Buckingham Palace to its core. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. From the outside, the marriage looked like a fairy tale. Inside the gates, it was chaos, emotional neglect, public embarrassment, and a pattern of reckless decisions tore the foundation apart before the ink on their wedding photos had even. Fergie was thrust into the royal machine with minimal preparation and even less support. She was expected to adapt, smile, wave, and stay silent. But Andrew wasn't exactly there to soften the blow. With naval commitments keeping him away and a distant emotional dynamic when he was around, the marriage quickly fell into dysfunction. And in the void, other people started appearing. Her alleged affair with Steve Wyatt wasn't whispered about in backrooms. It was obvious. Friends of the couple knew. Palace insiders knew. And according to multiple accounts, Sarah referred to Wyatt as the love of her life. Not her husband, not the father of her children, but the wealthy American businessman she reportedly saw while still legally married. Then came John Bryan. And with him came the photograph that would follow her for the rest of her life. The infamous toe-sucking photo in France wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was a full-scale royal crisis. The image of John Bryan kissing Sarah's feet, taken while they vacationed together, blindsided the monarchy. The palace's PR team couldn't spin it, couldn't bury it, and couldn't explain it away. It was raw, it was public, and it was scandalous in a way that no one in the royal family had prepared for. Reportedly didn't hold back. Her anger, particularly at Sarah, was said to be severe and public. The idea that a senior royal had brought this level of disgrace upon the family wasn't just a personal matter. It was institutional. And while the Queen may have approached the scandal with quiet disappointment and delivered the fury the press was already stoking. But what makes this story even more tangled is that Sarah wasn't the only one stepping out of bounds. He had his own track record of questionable behavior, and in some ways, it was far worse. There were accusations, from palace insiders, that Andrew had been inviting women into Buckingham Palace without proper security clearance. These weren't discreet visitors or old friends. Some were reportedly escorts. In a royal residence, while still a working member of the monarchy, security officials raised concerns. Staff noticed, but the behavior continued. Because when you're a royal, consequences take a long time to arrive. Andrew's attitude toward protocol wasn't just careless, it was entitled. Rules didn't seem to apply. And whether out of arrogance or indifference, he kept crossing lines the rest of the family wouldn't dare approach. So while Sarah was being publicly shamed for that infamous photo, Andrew's pattern of private misconduct simmered quietly, largely unaddressed. The difference? One got caught on camera. The other, shielded by rank and royal deference, managed to stay under the radar for a while. Their official divorce was finalized in 1996. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it barely changed. Andrew and Sarah continued living together at Royal Lodge. Not just co-parenting, but cohabiting, appearing together at events, sharing the same home, supporting each other in interviews. It was sold to the public as a modern, evolved form of friendship. But behind that polished narrative were years of unresolved dysfunction, enabled behavior, and mutual damage control. Because let's be honest, this wasn't about post-divorce harmony. It was about self-preservation. Sarah, still shunned by the firm, needed the proximity to Andrew to stay relevant. And Andrew, whose public reputation was quietly eroding, benefited from having someone fiercely loyal in his corner. They became each other's safety net, not out of romance, but because their scandals had made them untouchable to everyone else. The dysfunction continued to fester beneath the surface. Sarah's public missteps, financial scandals, paid interviews, and questionable business ventures kept her on the edge of royal respectability. Meanwhile, Andrew's private life was becoming more concerning, more secretive, and eventually far more dangerous to the monarchy's image. And then came the fallout. Allegations of Andrew's ties to Jeffrey Epstein took everything from uncomfortable to explosive. The palace was forced to reckon with decades of overlooked behavior. His disastrous BBC interview in 2019 made things worse. There was no remorse, no self-awareness, just denial. It was a media disaster that forced the royal family's hand. Titles were stripped, duties were revoked. He was officially pushed out of royal life. And yet, he remained at Royal Lodge, living in the same estate, still supported by Sarah, who publicly defended him every chance she got. She described him as misunderstood. A good man, a great father. Her loyalty didn't waver, even when public trust in him completely collapsed. And that's what kept the scandal alive. Because instead of drawing a line, she kept aligning herself with someone who had become a liability to the... Behind the scenes, pressure was building. Members of the royal family, including Princess Anne, reportedly demanded further consequences. With public faith eroding and press coverage turning more brutal, something had to give. Eventually, it did. Andrew was finally evicted from Royal Lodge. And with that, the last remnants of their long, strained cohabitation came to an end. What had once been framed as a sweet post-divorce friendship was now just a relic of two people clinging to the past. A past built on privilege, protection, and a shared belief that they were above the fallout. The truth is, their relationship was never just personal. It was public, symbolic, tied to an institution that relies on carefully managed appearances and strict codes of conduct. And Sarah and Andrew broke almost every rule in the book. Their story isn't about love or loyalty. It's about a culture of indulgence, about what happens when powerful people are allowed to believe they're untouchable. And when the public finally sees through the facade, the consequences come fast and hit hard. Their reputations are damaged beyond repair. Their roles in royal life erased. The scandals they once thought they could survive have become their legacy. And no amount of positive PR or friendly interviews will change that now. So what's left? Two people, once at the heart of royal life, now on the outside, not because of one mistake, but because of years of reckless behavior, denial, and refusal to change. Was it a tragic end, or just the inevitable result of unchecked power finally crashing into reality? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let us know how you think the monarchy should have handled it. And if you made it this far, hit the like button, share the video, and subscribe for more breakdowns of the celebrity chaos, royal scandals, and pop culture disasters they definitely don't want you talking about. Because trust, this story, it's just one chapter in a much messier book. The fallout didn't happen overnight. That's the most frustrating part. This wasn't some sudden royal implosion. It was a painfully slow unraveling. A decades-long exercise in denial, indulgence, and image maintenance that, truthfully, should have ended long before it did. But Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew weren't just stubborn. They were insulated. By titles, by history, and for a long time, by a system that didn't want to deal with the full extent of their mess. Let's not forget how long the palace protected the illusion. Even after that toe-sucking photo hit every newspaper in the UK, Sarah was kept around, just far enough from the inner circle to limit damage, but never fully cast out. And Andrew? He stayed firmly planted in the royal fold, still performing public duties, still being treated as if his behavior was just eccentric. The word disgrace hadn't entered the royal vocabulary yet. The truth is, they were both allowed to fumble forward for years, unchecked, because for so long, they weren't just tolerated, they were useful distractions, tabloid fodder that deflected attention from other royal issues. Dysfunction dressed up as devotion. But their actions had consequences. Slowly, those consequences started stacking up. Sarah's financial scandals piled higher. Failed ventures, bankruptcy rumors. That one moment she was caught on tape offering access to Andrew for £500,000, not exactly the redemption arc the firm had hoped for. And still, she kept going, still adjacent to power, still insisting on her seat at the... Andrew, meanwhile, was digging himself deeper. The accusations, the affiliations, the sheer number of red flags that people chose not to see until it was too late. Even before the Epstein story broke into the mainstream, there were warning signs. But the attitude remained, he's the Queen's son. He'll be fine. Until, of course, he wasn't. His 2019 BBC interview, by now the stuff of PR nightmares, was a breaking point. You could feel the collective gasp as it aired. The lack of empathy, the arrogance, the excuses that sounded so unconvincing, it made things worse. He thought he was clearing his name. What he actually did was accelerate his downfall. And what did Sarah do after that interview? She defended him, publicly, again, called him a true gentleman, said she was proud of him. That level of loyalty might have made sense if we were talking about a private citizen. But this wasn't some average ex-husband. This was a man entangled in one of the most high-profile and disturbing scandals in recent royal history. And Sarah couldn't, or wouldn't, see the damage. To be fair, loyalty had always been her fallback. In every interview, she repeated the same points. That Andrew was misunderstood, that their relationship was special, that they had raised their daughters with love, and that might have been true in a limited sense. But she kept missing the bigger picture, the one where her ongoing public defense of him became part of the problem. Because every time she vouched for him, it pulled the palace back into the scandal. And eventually, even the monarchy, as reluctant as it was to act decisively, had to draw the line. No more public roles. No more official titles. No more Royal Lodge. That last point, by the way, hit differently. Royal Lodge wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of status, of privilege, of the strange little world Andrew and Sarah had created together post-divorce. It was where they raised their daughters, hosted guests, maintained the illusion of a dignified, if unconventional, family life. Losing it was more than an eviction. It was a final severing of a royal safety net. And still, there were whispers that Sarah wasn't going anywhere, that she was still by his side, still defending him, still part of the same narrative they had built together, whether the palace wanted it or not. But the public was over it. The sympathy was gone. The curiosity had turned to criticism. And the damage, by then, was permanent. What's wild is that for years, their bizarre post-marriage arrangement was treated like some sort of heartwarming quirk. The world's most amicable divorce couple. The headlines used to say, people thought it was sweet, progressive, even, but in hindsight, it wasn't sweet, it was strategic. They weren't holding on to each other out of affection. They were holding on because they had no one else left. Sarah was no longer welcome in the royal spotlight. Andrew was radioactive. Together, they created a kind of strange, dysfunctional fortress. A place where they didn't have to answer hard questions. Where they could pretend everything was fine, even as the world watched it all fall apart. And now, after everything, their legacy is tangled in scandal. You don't think of their wedding or their public duties when you hear their names. You think of photos that should have never been taken, deals that should have never been made, and a house that became the last symbol of a royal partnership gone completely off the rails. There was a time when people rooted for Sarah, when she was a relatable duchess, the breath of fresh air, the one who didn't fit the mold. But over the years, she stopped being the underdog and became something else entirely, an enabler, a woman so wrapped up in loyalty that she couldn't, or wouldn't, recognize when it was hurting more than helping. And Andrew, the fall from grace speaks for itself. From royal favorite to institutional liability. From palace events to closed doors. From the Queen's son to the royal family's most controversial figure in living memory. What their story shows, more than anything, is the cost of unchecked behavior. The danger of systems that protect people from consequences for too long. And how loyalty, when misdirected, can become part of the dysfunction. They weren't the first royal couple to implode, but they might be the most revealing. Because they didn't just implode, they stayed in the wreckage. They tried to normalize it, tried to convince the world that what they had was evolved, modern, mature. In reality, it was codependence, survival, and refusal to let go of a version of their lives that no longer existed. There's no fairy tale ending here, no graceful fade into the background. Just two people who lived in the comfort of privilege for decades until privilege ran out. So where does that leave us? With a royal cautionary tale, a reminder that titles don't make you untouchable, that institutions can only protect you for so long, and that when the truth finally catches up, no carefully curated image, no loyal interview, and no shared estate can protect you from the fallout. Even after all the titles were stripped, even after the evictions and the public disgrace, there was still one thing Sarah and Andrew refused to surrender: the narrative. They kept trying to control it, kept giving carefully crafted interviews, kept spinning the same old lines about friendship, family, forgiveness, as if saying it enough times would somehow erase the years of damage, as if smiling through the chaos made it less real. But the thing about narratives, eventually, the truth breaks through. And when it comes to Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew, the truth was always far less polished than the palace-approved version. Theirs wasn't a tale of grace under pressure. It was a masterclass in how not to handle a public downfall. Let's be honest. By the time Andrew was evicted from Royal Lodge, their entire post-divorce performance had outstayed its welcome. The royal family was no longer interested in shielding them. The public was exhausted. And the press? They were done playing along. Because what had once been framed as unconventional co-parenting was now seen for what it really was: codependency dressed up as devotion. The irony here is that both Sarah and Andrew spent years trying to convince the world that they were just being modern, that their friendship was progressive, that maintaining a united front for the sake of their daughters was noble. But at a certain point, it stopped looking modern and started looking like two people who couldn't let go of their shared delusion. Sarah often spoke about loyalty like it was her moral compass. But what do you call it when that loyalty props up someone who's actively sinking the ship? Is it admirable? Or is it self-preservation disguised as virtue? Let's not forget, by the time Andrew's scandals reached international proportions, most of the royal family had quietly distanced themselves. You didn't see Prince William defending him on camera. You didn't hear Princess making statements to the press. Even the Queen, who had reportedly always favored Andrew, eventually had to step back and let the consequences unfold. But Sarah, she stayed the course. Even when the BBC interview turned into a viral disaster, even when headlines were using words like disgraced, exiled, and irreparable, even when Royal Lodge was no longer theirs, she kept doubling down. The question is, why? Maybe she thought that if she stood by him long enough, the tide would turn. Maybe she believed that the same public who had once laughed at her missteps would now see her as loyal, resilient, and misunderstood. Or maybe she just didn't have anywhere else to go, figuratively or literally. Because let's not pretend like Sarah didn't benefit from staying close. Living at Royal Lodge gave her status, access, proximity to the only institution that had ever given her relevance. Her royal connection was her brand, and no amount of divorce paperwork could change that. But in clinging to Andrew, she tied her reputation to a man who was no longer just scandal-prone. He was toxic. And when the palace finally pulled the plug, she was left floating with him. Now, both of them are living in the shadow of what could have been. They are not active royals. They are not media darlings. They are relics of a royal era that tried and failed to keep up with modern standards of accountability. Their relevance now exists only in retrospective coverage and viral clips. It's easy to forget that at one point, Sarah and Andrew could have taken a different path. After their divorce, there was a moment where she could have rebuilt her public image, separate from him, where he could have taken a quieter role, faded into the background, and avoided the spotlight. But they didn't. They stayed locked in a cycle of mutual excuse-making and bad decisions. And now, they've paid the price. They didn't lose everything overnight. It happened in stages. First, it was the titles. Then, the patronages. Then, the public appearances. Then, the home. By the end, they weren't just out of favor. They were out of the institution entirely. And not because they were forced, because they refused to evolve. The lesson in all of this? Proximity to power doesn't protect you forever. Sooner or later, the shield cracks. Sooner or later, the narrative you built stops working. And when it does, you're left with, for Sarah and Andrew, that reality is sobering. They are no longer part of the royal machine. Their stories are no longer curated by palace staff. They are just two people who used to be royalty, and now live as reminders of how fast the walls can come down when scandal knocks too many times. So where do they go from here? Sarah continues to dabble in media, self-help, and memoirs. She writes about forgiveness, about healing, about moving forward. But you can't move forward while still defending the very actions that set everything on fire. You can't grow while clinging to the same man whose downfall dragged you with him. And Andrew, there's not much left to say. He is not returning to royal life. He is not reclaiming his role. The monarchy has moved on. The public has moved on. All that remains is a cautionary tale of arrogance, of unchecked behavior, and of a system that protected too long and too much. If there's one thing this entire saga proves, it's that the royal bubble only stretches so far. When it finally bursts, the fallout is permanent. So, what do you think? Did Sarah stay loyal out of love, or was she just trying to cling to the last shreds of her royal identity? Should Andrew have been held accountable earlier? And how does this story reshape your view of what goes on behind those palace gates? Comment below with your thoughts. Like if you're just as stunned that this circus lasted as long as it did, and subscribe for more no-fluff breakdowns of the scandals, meltdowns, and elite disasters the headlines barely scratch the surface of. Because when power meets ego, and no one's around to say no, you get stories like this. And you know we're just getting started.